Well, we're at 6:01. So let's go to 6:02. That's being pretty aggressive with our timing for our gang, but we're at 95. We have over 539 people that have registered for today. So, but it's recording. So hopefully for those that can't make it, they'll be able to see it after the fact.
Who's
Yeah.
Peggy Bobo?
Peggy Bobo is on our board of directors for Reed Charitable Foundation. I don't know if you remember meeting her as well. She was with me at,
That's right. Yes, the two of you. You were so wonderful. Yes,
well,
exactly.
very
I
nice.
don't do. I've got what part of my difference is I just can't do names.
Well, it's funny. I'm getting that way too. After listening to a podcast that you did, and I shared this with you. I wanted to say this to the group, but it stopped me dead in my tracks. I listen to podcasts when I run, and uh, Dr. Brady Bradshaw, who is a local psychiatrist here in Orlando, Florida, who I adore, she sent me the podcast, and it had you in it, and so I listened, and it was the first time actually that I had heard you. And I decided that just listening to your voice and your, I don't know if it was the cadence. I mean, I couldn't see you. It was just a, podcast that I was
Yeah.
listening to. But I felt like you were somebody that I had known for forever. And I could just sit and talk to you and ask you questions. But also, what you said, I basically didn't run. I kept stopping and taking notes in my phone because everything I thought about ADHD, you flipped on its head for me. And I came home from that run. I was a sweaty mess, and I came straight to this computer and I started typing you an email, hoping that somehow we could get you to speak to our followers, because the work that you do is so important and is so impactful for, Reed Charitable Foundation focuses on dyslexia, but as there's a huge correlation and comorbidity between dyslexia and ADHD. And as I was listening to you, I thought, where does ADHD stop and dyslexia start? Where does dyslexia stop and ADHD start? So that's how we reached out to you.
Right.
Um, but I want to properly introduce you before we talk about that,
A
because,
question just came through asking if it'll be recorded, and the answer is yes, correct?
well, yes, it will. So first of all, our community education events that we do, we provide for free so that they are accessible to all. We promise exceptional content. So I know we're going to get that tonight.
I hope so.
But I also, part of the goal is meaningful fellowship. And I think that you are such an excellent speaker for this type of event for us, because not only do you work with students and adults who have ADHD and likely dyslexia also, but this is also your personal journey. And that was so exciting for me, because I love when we get to be able to bring experts that not only have the knowledge, but have the actual personal experience. So I'm going to say your credentials really quick, and then we're going to get to it. Your credentials, obviously, I could go on for probably 15 minutes. For those of you who don't know Dr. Hallowell, he is a board certified child and adult psychiatrist. He is a world authority on ADHD. He is a graduate of Harvard College and Tulane Medical School, and is part of the medical or faculty member for Harvard Medical School for over 21 years. He is the founder of the Hallowell ADHD centers that are located in Boston, Metro West, New York City, San Francisco, Palo Alto, and Seattle. He spent the last 4 decades helping thousands of adults and children with ADHD to live happy and productive lives, focusing on their strength-based approach to neurodiversity. He is a New York Times best-selling author and has written over 20 books on multiple psychological topics. His groundbreaking podcast, Distraction, which if you do not subscribe to it and ADHD impacts you, you've got to subscribe to it. began based on his book with his co-author, John Rady, Driven to Distraction, which really sparked a revolution regarding and understanding ADHD. His most recent book is ADHD 2.0. Here's the cover. I am one of those people who takes the cover off, off the book, but it is also wonderful and co-authored by his friend and colleague, John Rady. And I think it's poised to be just as successful as Driven to Distraction. Dr. Hallowell has been featured on 2020, 60 Minutes, Oprah, PBS, CNN. Do you ever get tired of this? The Today Show, Dateline, Good Morning America, the New York Times, USA Today, the list goes on and on. He also has a wonderful social media presence on TikTok and on Instagram. I love your 60-minute or your 60-second clips. They're just perfect. So if you do not follow him, you absolutely have to. So thank you, Dr. Hallowell, for being with us this evening.
Thank you for such a generous introduction.
Well, I mean, really, you're extraordinary, and we're just super honored and excited to have you.
Well, so I should balance what you said by quoting my son when he was about 10 years old. He's now 25. And one of my two sons, when I was going out to give a talk, he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to give a talk." He said, "Why would anyone want to listen to you talk?"
Well, yeah, that's what kids say, right? They think we're losers. That's all right. Well, like I said, you don't just study ADHD and help others with ADHD. This is also your own personal journey. You're both have dyslexia and ADHD. So I wondered if we could start with you maybe just sharing your dyslexia and ADHD story with us.
Sure. I was born in 1949. I'm 71 years old now. And I grew up in a little town on the elbow of Cape Cod called Chatham. And back then, Chatham was just a sleepy little fishing village. Sometimes they called it a drinking town with a fishing problem. But and I came from a very literary family. Not that they were writers or anything. They just loved books. And so I grew up surrounded by books, and my great aunt would read me stories almost every day. So I grew up with words. So when I got to the first grade, I was really looking forward to learning how to read. And it became pretty clear in the public school in Chatham that I was not getting it. Other kids were getting it, and I wasn't. And, you know, see, spot, run, and I just couldn't do phonics. Well, back then, if you were a little boy or girl who couldn't learn to read, they didn't have the kind of evaluations we have today. Your diagnosis is that you were stupid, and the treatment plan was try harder. And they had old-fashioned ways of getting you to try harder, like shaming you, putting you in the corner, dunce cap, all that kind of stuff. And it was not pleasant. You know, you started your career with shame. One of the many reasons I believe in God, I had this wonderful first grade teacher by the name of Mrs. Eldridge. Now, she had no formal training in reading that I know of, but she'd been teaching first grade for about 75 years. And she knew there was more to little boys and girls who couldn't read than their being stupid. And there were better ways to help them than shame them or punish them. And so what did she do? Well, during reading period, she was this very short, plump lady, gray curly hair. And during reading period, when it would come to be my turn, we'd be sitting at these little round tables, taking turns reading out loud. When it was my turn, she'd just come over and pull up one of those little chairs that she could somehow fit into, and she'd sit down next to me. And then she'd put her arm around me. So there'd be her forearm here and my little head here and an enormous cushion here. And it was also at a time when old ladies tended to wear a lot of powder. So she'd sort of sprinkle this cloud around like a sugar donut, you know, And as I would stammer and stutter, none of the other kids would laugh at me because I had the mafia sitting next to me. And that was my IEP. That was my treatment plan. It was Mrs. Eldridge's arm. It was really all she could do, but it was all she needed to do. Because you see, that arm took out of the equation the real learning disabilities. You know, I don't see dyslexia and ADHD as disabilities. I see them as traits. And if you manage them right, they can become assets. But the real disabilities are shame and fear and believing that you're stupid, believing that you're defective, believing that something is fundamentally wrong with you. And if you get that message in first grade, boy, it's very hard to get rid of it. But I didn't get that message at all. I got that message from Mrs. Eldridge's arm that has stayed around me ever since, that I was okay, you know, being who I was, not being able to read. By the end of the first grade year, I was still the worst reader in the class, but I was the most enthusiastic student of reading. I looked forward to reading period because I looked forward to that hug. And without knowing it, the part of my brain that did have talent with words was able to germinate and begin to inch its way out, however slowly, because it was not snuffed out by fear and shame. That arm allowed my talent to begin to develop, albeit slowly, simply by her offering me protection. She didn't excuse me from reading at all. She said, keep trying, you'll get there someday. And by the end of the year, I was certainly not there, but I had achieved the much more valuable goal of wanting to get there. And so I was enthusiastic and unashamed and motivated. Now, to this day, I am a painfully slow reader. It takes me forever to read a book. I don't read that many books. My wife says, I don't know how you know anything. You know, but I majored in English at Harvard while doing pre-med, you know, and I had to read books to do that. And you know, again, my fairy godmother, Mrs. Eldridge, is looking out for me. And you know, so that's why I believe so strongly in recognizing the talents embedded in these so-called disabilities. As for ADHD, you know, so I went through school. I went to tough schools. I went to Exeter, which is a prep school up in New Hampshire, really rigorous school, and then Harvard, and then Tulane for medical school. And I had no idea. I'd never even heard of ADHD, or it was called back then ADD. I didn't know what it was. I did, however, know that I was different. I knew that I thought differently, saw things differently. I would come up with crazy, zany ideas out of nowhere. I had sort of an intuition into people. I was playful. I was silly. I was irreverent. You know, and the great thing about Exeter was they encouraged you to be irreverent. They encouraged you to question everything. It was the opposite of a memorize and forget curriculum. It was a question, explore, discover curriculum. And I'm so lucky. So my imagination caught fire. And the same thing at Harvard. And it was, you know, it wasn't until I graduated from medical school, did a residency back at Harvard at the Mass Mental Health Center in adult psychiatry. And then after the residency was over, did a 2-year fellowship in child psychiatry, that in 1981, I heard a lecture about a condition I'd never heard of called attention deficit disorder. And I can still remember, it was July of 1981, and Elsie Freeman, this wonderful neurologist, gave us a talk on so-called learning disabilities and attention deficit disorder. And I saw myself in it immediately. And I also realized that the medical description missed all the good parts, you know, and I said, you know, there's a lot more to this than what's in the diagnostic manual. And I've been beating that drum ever since, because, you know, and then in the 80s, I began to see more people and they became my textbook, because the good part of this condition wasn't in the textbooks. They didn't mention anything about it. And, you know, it was treated as a deficit disorder. And then, you know, and then after I'd seen enough patients, and John Rady and I would brainstorm about it, and so we brought out a book called Driven to Distraction in 1994 that we thought, would be lucky if 10,000 people bought it. Well, it's still selling, and it's sold over 2 million copies now. So it really put this condition on the map. But one of the points I make is that it's not a deficit disorder. We don't have a deficit of attention. We have an abundance of attention. Our challenge is to control it. And it's not a disorder. It's a trait. And if you manage it right, which I was lucky enough to do instinctively, intuitively, because I had Mrs. Eldridge's arm around me, and because I went to schools that encouraged my irreverent way of learning, my question, that I wasn't just trying to please people. I fell in love with the joy of learning for its own sake, and that's common with us with this condition. So my personal journey has been a blessed one. I didn't suffer the way so many millions of people suffer. I was lucky, and again, why I believe in God. I mean, I was lucky to find fairy godmothers and guardian angels, and they happened to be called teachers and friends and others who saw that I had some talent and helped me to develop it. My 12th grade English teacher who got me to write a novel, it was a series of people who saw that I had talent. And that's why I'm so passionate about people learning, be they teachers or parents or grandparents or coaches, that this deficit disorder model is killing children and adults for that matter. It's scaring people away. It completely skews the truth, buries the truth. So I'm on a mission before I die. I want people to wish they had this condition, and if they manage it right, because embedded in the disorder part is a tremendous positive part, the part that gets left out of the textbooks. And that's the part, we're the people that change the world, we ADDers. Living in COVID, and I'll stop so you can ask more questions, but COVID, it's interesting enough that, the main test for COVID, the PCR test, well, PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction. And the polymerase chain reaction was the most important discoveries in biology in the past 50 years. It changed the whole field. It's right up there with the CRISPR. And the man who invented, created the PCR, the polymerase chain reaction, a man by the name of Corey Mullis, had big time ADHD. And he won the Nobel Prize in chemistry for his discovery and changed the world. And this is common. We're the game changers, the innovators, the discoverers, the pioneers, the kind of people who colonize this country and continue to change the world. So whoever is listening now, just blow up that stereotype in your mind: attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. It's a terrible term. It's not a disorder, it's a trait. Can it be a disorder? Yes, it can ruin your life for sure, but it can also take you to the top. And deficit, if it were a deficit, it would be a form of dementia, which it certainly isn't. It's an abundance. The challenge is to control it. And my analogy is, we've got a Ferrari engine for a brain. We've got an incredible race car for a brain, but we have bicycle brakes. Our inhibitory mechanisms are not strong enough to control the runaway power of our runaway brain. So my journey has been blessed with a lot of good luck. And for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I should add, the one crowning piece of luck was meeting the woman I've been married to now for 32 years. And honestly, without her, I hadn't written any books until I met her. And she also saw that I had something of value to me. So I did the two most important things, I think, if you want to do well in life, and certainly with ADD, marry the right person, or you don't have to marry, but be with the right person and find the right job. And those two I was lucky enough to do. And again, I mentioned God because I don't know what you want to call the force that guides you. I happen to call it God, but without that, by any rights, if you can I make one more point and then you can.
I love it. You can talk to me all night long.
by any rights, there's a study and a questionnaire called the ACEs score. Stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences Score, and this was formulated over the past 30 years, where it very statistically well validated, and they have a 10 adverse things that can happen to you between the years of 0 and 18, and they've tabulated them and given it to hundreds of thousands of people so that they can say with a high degree of certainty, if you have 4 or more of these items on the ACEs scale, and they're like abuse, deprivation, criminal, incarceration, this kind of stuff. If you have 4 or more, your chances of living anything like a satisfying life are very low. Chances are, as an adult, you'll get into drugs, you'll commit suicide, you'll be marginalized, you'll be depressed. It's just not a happy story. It's a very sad story if you have a score of 4 or higher. Well, my score is 8. It's an absolute miracle that I'm sitting here talking to you today. Statistically, I should be dead or, down and out. And the reason I'm not, again, the grace of God, but it is a particular form, and it is why I stress it so much. The reason I didn't crump and die is the power of connection, the power of, and at its most distilled, we call that love. And I think God is love. So it is love that saved me. And as it spreads out, it's not love, but it's it's connection, it's attachment, it's filiation, it's devotion, it's, pursuing something you care about. That's the force that helps people who, encounter difficulty growing up to not only do okay, but to triumph and prevail. And so even though the deck was stacked strongly against me, the reason I didn't crump and die is because of the power of connection with teachers, with friends, with ideas, with writers, with pieces of music, with a vision of greatness, with a vision of possibilities, all of that. That's all connection. And that's what rouses us and steers us and inspires us. And it's very real. And that's why having a vision of greatness is so important. Years ago, Alfred North Whitehead said, there can be no moral education without an habitual vision of greatness. Habitual vision of greatness. You need to see it every day. And that's why it's good to talk to your kids about, what do you think is great? Is great just being rich? Is great just being a famous athlete? What is really great? What is your vision of greatness? And to help them cobble together their own vision, guided by you, is really the root of what, part of what keeps people heading in a good direction. Well, that's my long answer to your question about my personal story with these conditions.
Well, I love it, and you just showed everybody why I scrambled in the house after I listened to your podcast and sent you an email, because there was so much within that anybody that's on this journey, dyslexia, ADHD, both, any type of neurodiversity, relates to all of it, right? The shame piece is so, your story is my son's story, and it's 60 plus years after. I mean, it's like stunning that could still be happening, right? It should be that you're telling this story at 71, that thank goodness, that decades later, this isn't what's happening. And yet it is what's happening. Only, in first grade, nobody was cuddling up to him, instead it was very much a shame-based, situation. And just like you and all of these kids, so bright, so capable, so eager to want to learn and to please. And he was left feeling like he didn't belong in school at 6, which is just stunning. And of course, with the proper support, just like you said, and connection and being in a safe environment where he, can learn, he's thriving.
How
And
did you become aware of what the real story was?
yeah, well, the truth is, if I'd known then what I know now, I would have easily known at 3 or 4 years old that Reed had dyslexia and ADHD. But of course, we all have these myths and things that we grow up with and believe about certain things. And I
No,
definitely,
it's like smart and stupid and try harder. That's the sum and substance of what most people know.
yeah, with dyslexia, I definitely thought it was reading backwards. I didn't think I didn't have no, the narrative for me as growing up was not that somebody that had dyslexia was not smart. The narrative was just they read backwards, you figure it out, somebody teaches you how to stop doing that. And it's more a punchline, like if you reverse a letter or something or misspell something, that, oh, that's my dyslexia.
Right.
That was sort of my narrative. And then with ADHD, my narrative was always hyperactivity. So, and he certainly doesn't appear, he's definitely not hyperactive. And I don't feel like Reed's inattentive either. So, but to your point, when I was running and listening to you say, it's actually an overabundance of attention. I'm like, yes, like now that resonates, with me. And the Ferrari engine with the bicycle brakes. So I love that quote. I know the boys in my house love that quote, and it makes so much sense. So would you talk a little bit about that and how we can help strengthen those bicycle brakes?
Yeah, I mean, we're just born with a mind, with a runaway mind. It's constantly going. It's driven by curiosity. So we're going wherever curiosity leads us with no regard for danger or authority. So it's like the toddler on a picnic, into the lake and, into the hornet's nest, whatever, doing things that, just driven by curiosity. And it's like a Ferrari. We just, no stopping us. We don't have any brakes. So we're a Ferrari with no brakes is kind of dangerous.
Well, scary.
We're in danger until somebody comes along and helps us learn how to develop our brakes. And so the old notion of dealing with these kids, particularly the ones who were physically very active, was to treat it as a discipline problem. Mm-hmm. So you're a bad boy and you should get spanked. And by the way, when kids used to get spanked, you could spank them all day and it would make no impact whatsoever. They said, fine, spank me again. But meanwhile, they're thinking, why is this person doing this to me? Why is she hitting me or he hitting me? And so you're developing a pretty ominous view of life from a very early age, because as far as you're concerned, you're just being who you are. You're just being this little kid with a lot of energy and enthusiasm, and you want to explore, and you're told that you're bad for doing that. And the beauty of the race car brain with bicycle brakes model is yes, you have to intervene. If your child is, poking another kid or tripping kids running by or snatching things that he shouldn't snatch, you have to intervene. But what you intervene by saying is, instead of you're a bad boy, you say your brakes are failing you. And you've already discussed it with him. So he knows he's got this issue with his brakes and says, oh gosh, yes, my brakes are failing me again. Because they don't want to be disruptive. They don't want to ruin every dinner party. They don't want to ruin every vacation. They don't want to be put out of class every day. They hate that and they feel ashamed of that. And after it's over, they're defiant at first because we're very proud. But in private, we eat our hearts out. We hate that. So if you can say your brakes are failing you, the kid can say, yeah, I got to work on my brakes. And it's a mechanical problem. It's not a character problem. It's not a discipline issue. It's not a goodness versus badness issue. It's wiring, it's mechanical, it's brakes. And that takes it out of the realm of feeling shame to the realm of, okay, I got to work on that. And I want to work on that, and I will work on that. And it makes, it's so much more than just spin doctoring. First of all, it's the truth. And second of all, it gives you a way of working with the child, or the adult for that matter, where you are eliminating shame, which is the toxic element that you want to eliminate. So the race car brain with the bicycle brakes, and then we have a number of ways of helping you with brakes. But let me just expand for a minute, if I could. You know, the whole notion of this as a deficit disorder. There are three main symptoms in the Diagnostic Manual that define ADHD, and they're distractibility, impulsivity, and hyperactivity or restlessness. Then to make the diagnosis, you have symptoms on the axis of inattention and symptoms on the axis of impulsivity and hyperactivity. And if you have a certain number of these symptoms and they occur in multiple settings, then you have the diagnosis. Well, look at those three symptoms, the core symptoms of this condition, and turn each one on its head, and you get an absolute tremendous positive. Distractibility. What could possibly be good about distractibility? Well, the flip side of distractibility is curiosity. If you didn't care what that noise was outside, you wouldn't bother to look. But you want to know, what is it? And so you're looking here and there and everywhere. And if you come back from being away for a few days and you notice the Petri dish doesn't look the way it looked when you left it, and you wonder why, and you then discover penicillin and you save millions and millions of lives. It is the curiosity version of distractibility that is a great gift. And like everything in ADHD, it comes in matched pairs. One is not so good and the other is wonderful. So, you know, they all have a flip side. And what's been overlooked in the medical model is the positive flip side. Okay, take impulsivity. That's what gets everyone into trouble. You're so impulsive. You should think first. Think before you act. Think before you act. You know, but, you know, why did you do that? Why? By the way, the honest answer to why questions in our world, the honest answer, why did you do that? Or why didn't you do this? The honest answer is, I don't know. You know, but if you put them in the rack and twist the screws, they'll come up with some answer, because my grandmother mistreated me, or because it's my birthday and I didn't get a good present. They'll come up with some answer. But the honest answer is, I don't know. I don't know why I, you know, told Mrs. Jones she looked fat. I just saw her and fat came into my mind and I said, you're fat. Well, I got into all kinds of trouble, but I didn't mean to hurt her feelings. It just popped out impulsively. Well, what could possibly be good about that? What could possibly be good about acting before you think, about having things pop out of nowhere? Well, what is creativity? But impulsivity gone right. You don't plan to have a new idea. They pop. Like calling Mrs. Jones fat. Well, the next day, maybe you come up with a solution to a geometry problem that nobody else had thought of, and it just comes to you. It just comes to you. That's what we mean by divine inspiration. It just pops. And that's where new ideas come from. They bubble up from the unconscious. You assimilate elements of your experience into new forms. And that's creativity. It is by definition impulsive. It depends upon having brakes that aren't too strong. Otherwise, the new idea would be repressed, as that's irrelevant, that's strange, we haven't seen that before, so we don't want it. Well, impulsivity depends upon, creativity depends upon impulsivity, depends upon disinhibition, depends upon brakes that aren't too strong. And then the third element of the triad that defines the condition in negative terms, hyperactivity. You get to be my age, it's called energy. I'm really glad I've still got, I've been seeing patients all day, and here I am all excited talking to you guys at the end of the day, and I'm ready to jump out of my skin. That's not pathology. that's an asset. You know, I'm a old white man, you know, and I've still got energy you know, and a sense of humor and a desire to connect, and you know, all that, that's part of the package. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this condition is an unmitigated blessing, but I'm certainly not saying it's an unmitigated curse, which is the way it's usually presented. That it's a moral failing, a discipline problem. These kids need more consequences and punishments. By the way, punishments and consequences don't work. You can try them if you want, but the experiment's been done for thousands of years. These are the battered children throughout history. Instead, what they need is someone who understands them and who can engage them in ways where they can use their assets and learn how to strengthen their brakes so they don't disrupt, you know, and get into trouble. If you just can keep in mind, for every negative symptom, there's a positive one attached to it. And my job as a doctor who treats it is to maximize the upside, maximize the curiosity, creativity, and energy, and minimize the downside, minimize the negative version of distractibility, the negative version of impulsivity, the negative version of, you know, hyperactivity. And fortunately, we can do that. Fortunately, we can do that. We can allow the upside to carry the day and minimize the damage done by the downside. Now, for those of you listening who, I don't mean to say this condition can't be horrible. It can absolutely be horrible. And those of you who are married to someone or have a child where the condition is ruining your life, I understand that. I get that. That's why it's so important to learn about it. That's why it's so important to learn how to strengthen brakes. That's why it's so important to learn methods of intervention other than punishment or incarceration. The prisons are full of people with untreated, undiagnosed ADHD. So are the halls of the addicted. One way people cope is they turn to drugs. And you know, the insidious thing about drugs is they work too well in the short term. It's not sustainable. And in fact, it's terrible, it's tragic. So in no way am I saying this condition is an unmitigated blessing. It can be a terrible curse. But the good news that I've learned over my many years is that curse can be reversed. How much? It's up for grabs, but I can pretty much promise anyone who comes to see me will get better. The only question is how much. How much better will you get? And there are so many other factors that come into play that it's hard to predict. Sometimes a lot. Sometimes you see a dramatic turnaround, and sometimes only a little bit. But we can at least bring an end to the suffering that can be stopped, like being mistreated and abused and misunderstood.
I mean, it's nearly impossible to follow up any questions with you, and that's saying something as somebody who practiced law and is used to asking questions. And I think it's just because, well, first of all, every response that you give is just so chocked full of wisdom and knowledge and content. But I want to say, first of all, I love talking about the strengths. Obviously, we have to, you know, with both dyslexia and ADHD, there are pieces of this that require support. But to your point, there are so many incredible gifts and talents that come with it. And I know you've been doing this. I mean, I've only been in this space 3.5 years. You have been doing this for decades and decades. But I say now, I have yet to meet someone who is dyslexic and or has ADHD that is not incredible, and that I want, you know, kind of to your point, I'm always wishing that I was dyslexic. I'm starting to think I might have ADHD, and I'm getting excited about it.
Excellent.
I don't know if I do or not, but I really want to. And I think that, you know, also to your point, what I have started doing in my own personal life, when I'm watching a movie where I think an actor or actress is just incredible. Or I'm watching a movie and I'm like, I love this, I love this actor in all these different movies. Or we're watching a sporting event, or we're watching some sort of documentary, or a musician, or something that I love. I would say 8 times out of 10, when I look them up to see if they have ADHD or dyslexia or both, they do. It's just it, and I always crack up now, and I say it in my house and everybody's like, ugh, but I'm just always trying to talk about it because I just think it's amazing.
It's a marker of talent. It really is. And when someone says their child was just diagnosed, I say, what good news? And they say, really? And they're shocked that I'm saying. I say, yeah, because it means your child, has talent. And then it's our job to unwrap. I tell folks, I don't treat disabilities. I help people unwrap their gifts. Now, I had one patient say to me, look, if this is such a gift, where do I return it? Because it can be a pain in the butt, but with persistence over time, you can unwrap the gift. It takes a lot of work. Again, I don't want people listening who are struggling to think you make it sound so easy. It's not easy. It's very labor intensive. These kids and the adults can be unbelievably taxing and draining and needy and just, really tough, and particularly if they get into addictions and all of that. So please, I know what a terrible struggle it can be to raise a child who has this, or to be married to someone who has it. But at the same time, with the right help, the turnaround can just be dramatic. And it's why I love my job, because when I see new people, I saw a new person this morning, and I just know her life is going to get better. And by the way, the biggest undiagnosed group are adult women.
Yeah, can we talk about that for a second? Because
Sure.
I think that was really powerful, too. Now that I'm understanding more about ADHD as it relates to boys, then I start hearing about, what that looks like in girls, which sounds a lot different. And so, yeah, I don't want people to miss out on, especially women and girls. It seems like that's something that they can really go under the radar.
Totally. I'm forever grateful to my daughter's fourth grade teacher. When we went in for parent teacher conference, she said to us, I'll ask Lucy a question and she'll just smile at me. And I don't think she's really heard the question. And then the teacher said, do you think she might have ADD? And that was so brilliant on the part of that teacher, because that's often the female version. I call it the Emily Dickinson ADD. Your mind is lost in thoughts and you're sitting in the back of the room, staring out the window, looking at the clouds and counting the insects you see buzzing around in the miasma, so it's the daydreamy, lost in thought, mind constantly moving, but body is serene, under control. And you have to ask her, what's it like to be in the classroom? And she'll say, oh, it's fine. I'm almost never there, and they get dismissed as not very bright or, slow, or, the education system misses it completely. And then when they become adults, if they go for help, again, they'll get called depressed or anxious or both, or not very bright. And the average doctor who sees adults doesn't know anything about it. Even the average adult psychiatrist doesn't know about it. I can't tell you how many women have come to see me who had spoken with either their primary care doctor or a psychiatrist first and been told, no way you have this. And they clearly had it. It's because they didn't fit the stereotype. They weren't disruptive. They weren't failing, but particularly if you're doing well in life like you are, no way you'll get the diagnosis, and if you get anything, it'll be you're depressed or you're anxious. And you may well be depressed and anxious, but it's caused by the untreated ADHD. You're depressed because you're underachieving. Even if you're achieving at a very high level, you could be doing better. And you're anxious because you're wondering, what mistake am I going to make next? And you've probably compensated for that by becoming a little OCD, becoming almost maniacally well organized, you know, so you're holding it together, but you have it. And when it gets named and you can see it, yes, my whole life I've been a dreamer, I've been creative, I've been strong-willed, I've wanted to be free, I've wanted to grow things, develop things, create things. You know, I have this ongoing need, this ongoing restive urge to create, and whether it's art or grow a business or work for a cause like you're doing. I mean, you know, we are very mission-driven people. When we have the mission, we're on track. When we don't have the mission, we're lost, we're groping, you know, so we need the mission to organize us. And yeah, adult women like you, who for all the world look like they're superstars, you drill down a little bit and you'll find, you know, the issues that I was just talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know I want to get to, a lot of people are asking questions and you know, about how to help. And so, you know, one of the things I thought we could talk about, you had described in the book stellar home environments, stellar learning environments, and in work also. So I know we had a teacher ask, you know, what does it look like to support, you know, a student in the classroom, or lots of students in the classroom, to have kind of that stellar learning environment. So I wondered if you would maybe share, you know, some practical tips for what educators can do to make it a more, you know, conducive environment.
Low on fear, high on connection. Low on fear, high on connection. Low on regimentation, but high on structure. All kids, and by the way, what's good for ADD is good for all kids, and they all need structure. They all need rules. The best rule-based system I ever saw was in my daughter's kindergarten. And there was one rule, and it was written on the wall in big red letters. And the one rule was respect. And they would talk about it at circle time. They'd be sitting cross-legged on the floor and talking about what's a respectful way to treat the environment. What's a respectful way to bring a visitor in? Like last week we had a visitor and all you boys made fart noises. Was that respectful? And they said, no, I guess not. And, you know, so, okay, well, you know, and the kids will internalize this. And I'll never forget, one day Lucy was, you know, kindergarten, and I was leaving the house, you know, to give a talk. And my wife said, would you help Lucy get dressed? So I go in and I said, Lucy, you got to get dressed. She said, I don't want to get dressed. I said, Lucy, you have to get dressed. I'm rushing to catch a plane. I don't want to get dressed. Lucy, you know, like most people with ADD, she's very stubborn. Lucy, if you get dressed right now, I'll bring you a big present when I come home. And she looked at me and she said, Daddy, that is not the right way to solve this problem. That came right from circle time, right from the idea of respect. And she knew it was not right for me to bribe her to do something, you know. We had to have a better way to solve the problem. And,
I feel like you were in our house like almost every morning about something. It's like you know me.
By the way, any expert who says you shouldn't bribe children doesn't have children. You have to bribe children. It may not be the best way, but sometimes you got to resort to whatever works.
Yeah. So talk to me too about, hold on, darling. I know I've got an ADHDer who's just got to say hi.
Hi.
Hi there. Nice to meet you. What's your name?
Reed.
Hi, Reed. You've got a race car brain?
Yeah.
Good for you. Wow. What do you want to do? Do you know what great things you want to do someday?
No.
Well, you're going to do great things. You want to be an astronaut?
I don't know.
You know, the guy who spent the longest time in space, he spent a year in space in one of those little things.
Dyslexic?
What?
Dyslexic or ADHD?
He was ADHD. Yep. And he was told when he was a little bit younger than you by his grandmother. His grandmother told his mother, don't bother sending him to school. He's never going to learn anything.
That's
And that is very stupid. That was a not very smart grandmother. But,
not big brain grandma. Not
yeah, exactly. But so you've got a great future, Reed. And most people with ADD, and it sounds self-serving for me to say this since I have it myself, but for whatever reason, and I can't prove this, and people take me to task for saying it, but it's been my experience that most people who have this condition are physically very attractive. And you're a very handsome boy, so.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hallowell. That's so kind of you. I tell him that all the time too. I think he's awfully cute.
He's very, yes.
Thank you for joining us, buddy. Well, I wondered if you would share with us some non-medication. I want to talk about medication too, because I think that's super important. But can we talk first about non-medication supports for ADHD?
Well, the combination of connection and structure is critical. So you want to have people who like you, a teacher who likes you, parents who like you, friends who like you, relatives who like you, and structure, rules, and the simpler the better. But it's good to learn manners. It's good to learn, how to behave. It's good to learn to shake hands and make eye contact. I'll never forget my grandfather teaching me that. And, these basic lessons, because people with ADD, we often have trouble with social interaction. So you want to give them the structure. How do you make a friend? Don't interrupt, simple rules. Don't start talking about yourself until the other person has talked about the other person, simple rules that can guide you in a context of connection. And then as they get older, you want to, again, have in the context of connection, challenge. We like difficult. We need difficult. Boredom is our kryptonite. We can't do boredom. So make sure they're always challenged. Don't dumb it down. Don't dumb it down for us, and expect us to work hard. We tend to be very hard workers. One of the new interventions that I talk about in the new book is stimulating the cerebellum through physical activity that challenges balance, like standing on a wobble board or standing on one leg with your eyes closed, or the whole range of exercises that challenge balance. And that's proves to be, it turns out there are rich connections from the cerebellum to the frontal parts of the brain where the action is in ADHD. And if you do, this guy Winford Dorr in England has developed a whole program of doing a graduated series of increasingly difficult exercises that challenge balance. If you do them 15 minutes twice a day, in 3 to 6 months, you'll get significant improvement in ADHD, dyslexia, as well as mood regulation. Wow. If you want to learn more, go to distraction.zingperformance.com. So the
and
word,
that's Xing.
I'm sorry?
Is it ZING?
Yeah. Distraction.zing, Z-I-N-G, Z like zebra, Z-I-N, zingperformance.com. Okay. You can see an interview with me and the guy who developed it and the program. I think it's the most exciting breakthrough in non-medication treatment that's come down the pike. Coaching is another important part of non-medication coaching, learning new ways of getting organized, being on time. It takes repetition, but coaching, and the older you get, your mom is your designated coach up to a certain age, and then the nag factor gets in the way. So that's when it's good to have someone other than mom be the coach. And physical exercise also is really helpful, not just the cerebellum stimulating, but general physical exercise, really, really good for ADHD, really, really good. And having the creative outlet, I mentioned that before, but we need a creative outlet. We really need a creative outlet. We need a mission, a purpose, and a place to, invest our creativity. That's why I write books. If I don't have a book going, I'm just out of sorts. And then for someone else, it's growing a business, the serial entrepreneur. If they don't have a a deal going, they're out of sorts. It doesn't matter how wealthy they are. They need to be creating. They need to be growing something. That's what we are biologically driven to create. I don't mean procreate. That's another story. But to create, and it's really part of who we are. And we need to find the right. I call it find the right difficult. It's got to be difficult or we'll get bored, and it's got to be the right one. We've got to have an aptitude for it. So find your right difficult is something that you can turn your career around by finding your right difficult, you know, and you know, and the same thing with finding the right person to live with, or, you know, marry or pair up with, whatever verb you want to use. The possibilities are so tremendous with this condition. That's what I want people to get. I mean, I know I've stressed that it can be extremely difficult, but don't give up, because once you find your right difficult, once you find the right person, once you find the right stellar environment, just sparks fly. And, you know, we're the kind of people who make things happen. And, you know, dismal can turn to delightful in the space of an hour. You know, it's really true. And I'm not telling sentimental stories, because I've seen it over my 40 years of work, of 71 years of living with it and raising 3 kids who have it, and then 40 years of working with it professionally. It's like nothing else in all of the behavioral sciences, because as much as it can go to hell, it can go to heaven. You know, as much as it can create misery, it can create ecstasy and joy and success and wealth and huge contributions. So, you know, don't listen to the naysayers. They don't know what they're talking about. They really don't. And it's, you know, we need to spread the good word, the truth about ADHD.
Okay, so I want to be respectful of your time, but I want to ask you about medication really quick before we go. And I know
Let me sum
we
up.
literally could talk to you to midnight, and I'm so sad that we're not going to. And I know everybody else will be too.
Let me just sum up medication really quickly. The title of the chapter about medication in my book is The Most Powerful Tool Everyone Fears. It's a very powerful tool that will help 80% of people who have ADHD. You've got to see a doctor who knows what he or she is doing. It has to be carefully monitored. But the basic bottom line is, if it helps you and does not cause side effects, use it, and you can use it indefinitely. If it doesn't help you or does cause side effects, don't use it. That's it.
Yeah.
People get all twisted into knots about it, and you know, they say, well, why don't we try a few years of non-medication treatment first? And sure, you can do that. And I've written books about how to do that, including my current book, because medication doesn't work for me, and 20% of people it doesn't work for. But saying, let's stick with the non-medication without trying medicine is sort of like saying, why don't we do a few years of squinting before we try eyeglasses?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I mean, why not try the proven intervention? Because it'll make all the non-medication interventions that much easier to implement.
Yeah.
Now, if it doesn't work, fine. You know, all is not lost by a long shot. But unless it's against your religion, it just makes no sense, in my opinion, not to give it a try in the hands of a doctor who knows what he or she is doing and has experience.
So I think there's 2 things about that I know were in my narrative about medicine. One, that it would potentially cause addiction. So I know you'll talk about that because it's in the book. So I would love for you to spread that knowledge for anybody who hasn't read it. And 2, the other thing that I have heard is that it stunts personality and things like that. I have not seen that in the people that I know that have benefited from it, but I was curious your thoughts on that.
If it does anything you don't like, you stop it. So if you take the medication and you turn purple, stop it, and you'll go back to your original color. If you take the medication and you become a boring zombie, stop it, and you'll go back to your effervescent self.
Yeah.
All the side effects are reversible.
Yeah.
And the medicine, depending upon which one you take, lasts from 4 to 12 hours. So the worst that happens is you have a few hours where you're not yourself. That's the worst that happens. The best that happens is like you got eyeglasses. Suddenly you can see, you know, as for addiction, this is another misunderstood fact. People say, oh, well, isn't it a gateway drug? The opposite is true. Studies show that kids who take stimulant medication have a much lower rate of addiction than kids who do take it. So it closes the gateway, if anything. And that's very important because addiction is about 10 times more common in people with ADHD than in the general population. And 80% of addiction gets started between the ages of 13 and 23. So it makes sense to have your child pre-13 on stimulant medication if he or she has ADHD as a means of dramatically reducing the chances of their becoming addicted.
Yeah, I thought that was, it was definitely not what I knew had been told. And I thought that that was something I definitely wanted to get out there in the world, that by the world-renowned expert in ADHD, people need to know that that's not, the opposite is true, especially this group, because we're talking ADHD and we're talking dyslexia. And of course, we know there's wonderful statistics, but there's also really scary statistics as it relates to addiction. And then of course, if you have ADHD and dyslexia in your family, like I do, both my husband's and my sides of the family have addiction issues. So that addiction, that word is scary. Yes. And so, knowing the truth gives you, having knowledge gives you power. And having that knowledge has been game-changing in our household, game-changing.
Wonderful.
I want to say to you, thank you so very, very much for the work that you do and for the message that you are sending to this community. You are a treasure, and I know you know that, but thank you from the bottom of my heart. I'm so thankful.
Well, you're a treasure, and what you're doing is absolutely, if we could take you and spread you around the country, what you're doing is remarkable. And, you really are saving lives, changing lives, shaping lives in a wonderful, wonderful way. I can't congratulate you enough.
Thank you so much for your time. I know we are going to get 1,000 questions. I want to, if anybody wanted to try to work with you, Dr. Hallowell, how would they get in touch with you?
The easiest thing is just go to my website, drhallowell.com, DR, no period, just drhallowell.com. And you'll find everything there, ways to reach me, my books. You'll find access to my TikTok stuff. So there's a whole world of wealth of material on my website, and I love hearing from people. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
I hope we'll get to talk to you again soon.
Please, I'd love to.
Thank you. Have a great night. Thank you, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.